Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into a freezing, smoky, lice-ridden medieval peasant house. Because what better way to fall asleep than imagining yourself surviving a winter so cold, even your breath might freeze to your mustache. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just outside a sagging wattle and daub cottage. The sun's gone, not that it was ever warm today. A bitter wind slices through the trees, and everything's coated in a crust of ice. Somewhere off in the woods, a wolf howls. You probably won't survive this. You step into the cottage, and whoa! It hits you like a poorly flung turnip. The smell. Wood smoke, wet wool, something vaguely animal. Maybe actual animal. Possibly alive, possibly dinner. Possibly both. The door barely closes behind you. It's just a plank on leather hinges, and you feel the cold sneak through every gap. Inside, it's dim. One fire sputters in the central hearth, sending smoke upward, or at least trying to. The chimney's just a hole in the thatch. Your eyes water as the smoke decides to stay low and mingle with your lungs. This is it. Your humble abode for the winter months. Walls made of woven sticks and dried mud. Roof stuffed with straw. Unless you've got money, you don't. In which case, it might also leak less. You're not here for the luxury. You're here to not freeze to death. Your feet crunch on the rushes scattered over the dirt floor. They're supposed to soak up the muck. They don't. Your socks are wet. Actually, your socks are your only pair. Welcome to December 1352. The fire's dying. Again. There's a log nearby, but that's tomorrow's firewood. You debate whether your survival tonight is worth tomorrow's hypothermia. You toss it on anyway. It hisses with leftover rain and lets out one pitiful pop. Like even the fire can't be bothered anymore. Your family huddles nearby. Yes, everyone. Grandma, the neighbor's orphaned cousin, a chicken named Frida. All of you crammed into this one-room box. In the corner, the baby's wrapped up tight in a bundle that looks suspiciously like last year's curtains. Outside, the wind groans. The walls creak back. A cold draft snakes across your neck, and you instinctively clutch the fur-lined cape you bartered for last autumn. You traded 3 chickens for it. Honestly, worth it. Someone hands you a cup of something hot. It's thin, brothy, possibly vegetable-based. Possibly just warm water with hope. You sip anyway. It helps. Kind of. Overhead, the rafters are thick with hanging tools, old meat, and drying herbs. There's something oddly comforting about it.
The only light is from the hearth and a tiny oil lamp. Candles? Pff, too expensive. You had one once. Melted half of it during summer, trying to read a borrowed Psalter page. You slump onto the bench near the wall, basically a wide plank on stumps. The dog's already there. He growls as you try to nudge him off, so you both sit awkwardly side by side, like 2 co-workers forced to share a seat at a company feast. At least he's warm. You look around. It's a hard life. But this is actually better than it was a few centuries ago. By the 1300s, peasants' homes had slowly evolved from smoky, windowless mud huts into, well, smoky, slightly larger mud huts with maybe a window. Progress. There's even a loft. Sort of. It's a raised wooden platform where your older brother sleeps with his new wife. Don't ask how that's working out. Let's just say the walls definitely don't reach the ceiling. Now, as you try to drift off on your itchy wool blanket, someone farts. Loudly. No one reacts. You suspect it was the baby. Outside, wolves howl again. Or maybe it's just the wind in the trees. You try to imagine you're somewhere else. Anywhere else. But the truth is, this little space is your whole world.
and you'll be spending the next 5 months trying not to die of exposure, disease, or bad porridge. A mainstream historical fact: most peasants lived in one-room homes with central hearths, poor insulation, and little privacy. But this was still considered normal, and not even the worst housing of the time. The hearth wasn't just for cooking. It was the soul of the house, the only source of light, heat, and daily ritual. A quirky tidbit: some peasants would sleep with livestock on purpose, not just because of space, but because pigs, goats, and chickens generated enough body heat to warm the whole room. Turns out bacon really does save lives. And historians still argue whether peasants' lives were truly nasty, brutish, and short, as often described, or whether we've over-dramatized them, ignoring moments of community, humor, and resilience. You know, like sharing a blanket with a goat named Bernard. You close your eyes, listening to the rhythmic breathing of your family, the faint crackle of the fire, and the slow drip of melting frost from the roof into the corner bucket. It's not glamorous. It's not Instagrammable. But somehow, you're still here, breathing, warm-ish, alive. You wake up stiff. Everything aches, including some parts you didn't know had the nerve endings to ache. Your back feels like it lost a wrestling match with a tree root, and your neck has somehow fused with the wall. Good morning, medieval winter. Someone nudges you. It's your sister, elbowing you into motion with the grace of a mule kick. Time to get up. You don't want to. But the house is even colder now, and the fire's down to a few orange smudges in the ash. If you don't get it going again, this place will be as inviting as the inside of a crypt. You haul yourself up and stumble toward the coals. The wool blanket drags behind you like a medieval superhero cape. Except, instead of flight or invisibility, your powers are mild warmth and perpetual itching. You reach the hearth and gently poke at the embers, whispering encouragement like they're a sad friend in need of a pep talk. The smoke chokes a little less today. Maybe the wind shifted. Maybe it's just decided to ruin someone else's morning. While the fire sputters back to life, you notice what you're wearing. Or not wearing. One thin linen undertunic, one heavier woolen overtunic. And that's about it. No thermals, no Gore-Tex. Just layers. Very medieval layers. Time to get dressed properly. You throw on a third tunic, slightly damp, slightly too long. No pants? Technically, no. Most peasants wore hose. Basically, medieval tights, sometimes tied to a belt, and absolutely not designed for comfort. You wiggle into yours with all the enthusiasm of someone climbing into a damp sleeping bag. The outer layer is your prized possession, a thick woolen overtunic, dyed a vague muddy green. Expensive stuff, that dye. You only fell in that vat once, but it got the job done. At least now people can spot you from a distance and say, "Hey, there goes that guy who smells like wet moss." Lice? Don't even ask. They're your constant companions. Everyone's got them. You're not dirty. Well, okay, you are dirty, but that's not the point. Baths are rare, soap is worse than rare, and your hair hasn't been washed since before harvest. You scratch absent-mindedly and try not to think about it. It's laundry day, technically. But laundry in winter is optimistic. You'd have to break through the ice at the stream and pray your hands don't turn to wood while scrubbing your only shirt with last year's ash soap. Most people just wait for the rain and do a passive rinse. You wrap your head in a coif, a tight-fitting linen cap that covers your ears. Not a fashion statement, a necessity. Without it, your ears might fall off. That's not a joke. Frostbite is real. And you've seen...
They're for survival and wealth. Did you know that laws literally dictated what fabrics and colors peasants could wear?
Sumptuary laws made sure you didn't dress above your station. No purple, no silk. No pretending you were anyone other than your cold, sniffly, wool-clad self. You wrap your hands in strips of wool, makeshift mittens, and slide your feet into your only pair of shoes. Leather, cracked, slightly too small because they were passed down from your cousin. You stuff in moss to plug the holes. Moss, the medieval insulator you never asked for. Outside, your breath fogs in the air like smoke from a dragon's nose. You look around and see the village beginning to stir, slowly. People emerge like groggy hedgehogs from their burrows, bundled and blinking into the white-gray chill. You nod to your neighbor, who's wearing what looks like the same tunic as yesterday, and the day before, and possibly every day since last solstice. Honestly, same. You spot the local reeve, stomping through the snow like he owns the place, which, technically, he kind of does. He's got actual shoes with buckles. The nerve. You bend down to adjust your hose again, only for the strap to snap. Great. Now you're one stiff breeze away from an embarrassing historical reenactment. You tie it with a bit of twine and mutter a prayer to St. Francis, patron of poor people, animals, and apparently sagging legwear. But here's a comforting historical fact. Wool, while itchy, is surprisingly good at retaining warmth, even when damp. Medieval people knew this, which is why nearly every item of winter clothing revolved around sheep. If you didn't own one, you knew someone who did. And here's a quirky fringe fact you'll love. Some people swore by layering dried nettles inside their shirts for warmth. Yes, nettles. Spiky, rash-inducing, aggressively unfriendly plants. But dried right, they were warm, and oddly enough, repelled pests. Except lice. Nothing repels lice. Historians still argue whether peasants' clothing was truly insufficient or simply uncomfortable by today's standards. Some scholars suggest peasants were surprisingly adept at insulation with limited resources. Others say they just suffered through it and complained loudly. We'll never know for sure, but based on your current chattering teeth, you're leaning toward the latter. Back inside the house, someone's brushing crumbs off their tunic, using the official medieval method, slapping themselves repeatedly. There are no napkins. There's no soap. You just deal. You check your sleeves for fleas. One jumps, you sigh. It's going to be another long day, but you survived the night. That's more than some can say. The cold's still out there, clawing at the edges of your world. But under 3 layers of wool, nettle and sheer willpower, you've managed to create a tiny, defiant pocket of warmth. And it's yours. The fire's been stoked, your itchy tunics are layered, your hose is half tied with twine, and your breath still fogs the air like dragon smoke. It's time to face the next bitter truth of medieval winter. The hearth is failing you. You shuffle back toward it, hoping it's finally doing its one job. But nope. The warmth you expected? Not happening. You stretch your hands toward the embers, fingers splayed, and all you feel is a gentle tease of heat. Like the fire is mocking you with just enough warmth to remind you what you don't have. Here's the thing. The medieval hearth wasn't exactly a roaring fireplace from a Renaissance painting. It was basically a glorified campfire inside your home. No insulation, no flue, just open flames in the middle of the floor, with smoke that sometimes found its way out the hole in the thatched roof. If you were lucky, and the wind was polite. You sit down on a 3-legged stool, which wobbles like it has commitment issues. Behind you, someone's coughing. Not dramatically, just that constant dry winter cough that everyone seems to have. You're breathing smoke half the day. It's basically free lung seasoning. Still, the hearth is the heart of the house. Meals are made here, stories are told here. Babies are birthed frighteningly close to it. Even pets gather here. And by pets, of course, we mean that slightly deranged rooster who refuses to sleep and might be plotting your downfall. You poke the fire again, trying not to inhale more ash. The logs are half burned and damp. Everything's damp. Medieval winters aren't dry and crisp like storybooks. They're soggy, moldy, and full of things that drip on you from unseen places. The only way to make a decent fire is with dry wood, and dry wood is rarer than mercy from your landlord. Most peasants gathered fuel from hedgerows or forests, technically owned by the lord. Technically. You borrow a few branches here and there, which is fine unless the bailiff catches you. Then it's fines, or stocks. Or, in extreme cases, your neighbor being forced to publicly insult you during Sunday service. You add a few twigs. They hiss like they hate you. The smoke rises, curls, and then promptly sinks, filling the room like a fog machine from hell. Your eyes water. Your throat scratches. Your dignity? Already gone. And yet, it's kind of cozy. In that rough, bitter sort of way. Someone's pulling a stool close to the hearth behind you. It's the old woman from across the lane. She's wrapped in 6 layers, each one more threadbare than the last, and humming a song that might be a prayer, or maybe a curse. It's hard to tell with her. She begins to warm her hands, and tells you, in that creaky voice of hers, how the hearth spirits don't like when the fire goes out at night. They get restless, she says, and come creeping round the beds, looking for breath to steal. You smile nervously. She doesn't. You shift closer to the flames. That superstition wasn't.
Many peasants believed hearths had spirits. Protective ones if you were respectful. That's why you'd never spit into the fire or throw in moldy bread or speak ill of the house while the flames listened. In fact, some people would leave a small offering of food on the hearthstone overnight. Just a crumb. Just in case. Another log is added. Someone finally caved and used part of the emergency pile. The flames leap up with joy and suddenly the whole room softens. Warmth returns, briefly, dancing across your cheeks like a welcome drunk uncle. Now the kids gather closer. They pull their little benches into the fire circle, clutching scraps of cloth or wooden toys that resemble animals, badly. One kid's proudly holding a chunk of wood with 2 holes drilled in it. It's a horse, he says. Sure, buddy. Dinner's not for hours, but someone's already hanging the pot over the flames. A bit of barley, maybe a scrap of dried onion, a lonely turnip, whatever's left. There's no fridge, no pantry, just a corner with sacks and clay jars that smell suspiciously like mouse. You stir the pot. It doesn't fight back, that's a good sign. A bit of trivia. Some of these peasant hearths actually had small side platforms or iron tripods called trivets. They held pots above the flame just high enough to not scorch everything to oblivion. Simple, clever tech, proof that even when life was rough, people were still thinking. But you can't get around the smoke. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your pores. It's in your teeth somehow. You probably taste like a burnt broomstick. Medieval houses weren't designed with airflow in mind, unless by design you mean accidental hole in the wall, which actually helps. The rafters above you are black with soot. They've been that way for generations. One spark and the whole roof could go up like a bonfire at midsummer. That's why the family keeps a bucket of sand near the fire. Not water because, in winter, water freezes. But sand? Always ready. You glance up at the smoke hole. It's snowing outside now. You know this because it's also snowing inside. The flakes drift lazily down through the opening and land on the hearthstone with tiny hisses. You just stare at it for a second and mutter, of course. And still, the hearth is where everyone comes together. There's laughter, there's gossip. Someone just mentioned the Lord's wife and the visiting knight again. You're not saying it's true, but the blacksmith's wife swears she saw something. The fire cracks again. A piece of log splits, sending a flurry of sparks toward the dog who doesn't even flinch. He's been through worse. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In most medieval peasant homes, the hearth was the kitchen, the heater, and the only real light source. Chimneys didn't become common in peasant homes until the late 16th century. Before that, smoke simply accumulated near the roof or exited through the same place the weather came in.
And here's your quirky tidbit. Some people would smear pig fat along the edges of the hearthstone to keep out cold spirits. Not because it was effective, but because it made them feel in control, which, honestly, is the core of human survival in any era. Doing weird things with conviction. Historians still argue whether peasant homes were deliberately designed for communal warmth or just shaped by necessity. Some argue it was efficiency, less space, less heat loss. Others think it was cultural, emphasizing togetherness, shared labor, and the collective snore. You scoot even closer now, toes nearly touching the hearth. It's finally throwing off some real heat.
Legs warm first, then your hands, and finally, just for a moment, your cheeks. You close your eyes. It's not much, but it's enough. It's nighttime again. You lie there, curled up on a rough, straw-stuffed mattress that smells faintly of mildew, sheep, and something else that probably has legs. Your limbs ache from the cold, even under 3 layers of wool and one overly ambitious dog who's taken up permanent residence at your feet. And yet, you're grateful. Why? Because tonight, you're not sleeping alone. There are 5 bodies crammed into this sleeping space. 6 if you count the chicken, who insists on sleeping on someone's head. You shift slightly to avoid elbowing your cousin's ribs, which would definitely spark a sleepy groan and possibly a pillow fight, minus the pillows. Welcome to the snuggle pile, a medieval sleep strategy, equal parts necessity and unspoken truce. It's dark. The fire's been banked down to glowing coals, more for safety than warmth. Someone snores with impressive volume, possibly 2 people, snoring in harmony. The ceiling above is invisible, lost in soot and shadows, and the smell of damp wool fills the air like a very committed ghost. There's no such thing as a bedroom here. Privacy isn't a thing. Sleep in winter is about survival, not aesthetics. You sleep fully clothed, boots nearby in case you need to run from, well, anything. Bandits, wolves. That one time the outhouse caught fire? Long story. Your mattress is literally a sack of straw. Maybe sweet-smelling when it was fresh, but now flattened, moldy, and possibly housing an entire flea civilization. If you're lucky, someone remembered to shake it out this week. If not, well, hope your dreams don't involve too much scratching. And the snuggling? It's strategic. Heat retention. Human insulation. You nestle your back against someone's spine, tuck your knees up tight, and make peace with the fact that you're about to spend 8 hours breathing in someone else's breath. It's either that or freeze. Historians call this practice communal sleeping.
And while modern minds might raise an eyebrow at this, the medieval approach was practical. Warmth first, social boundaries later. You shift, and a cold foot lands on your shin. You hiss through your teeth, but don't move. There's nowhere else to go. The fire's warmth doesn't reach this corner, and there's a hole in the wall letting in a slow, icy draft. Your only shield is the warmth of each other, and possibly the chicken. Not all snuggle piles were this rustic. Wealthier peasants might have a raised wooden bed frame, maybe even ropes laced underneath for support. A rope bed. That's where the phrase sleep tight came from. You'd have to tighten the ropes every few days to stop sagging. But tonight, you'd settle for just not rolling into the wall crack where spiders definitely live. Someone coughs. You all shift slightly, a slow wave of motion rolling through the bed like a furry, itchy centipede of survival. Still, there's a comfort here. Shared stories, half-sleep giggles, a whispered prayer before bed. One of the kids mumbles something about St. Nicholas, then immediately starts snoring again. It's a common medieval belief that sleep should be taken in 2 segments. First sleep, then a period of wakefulness, then second sleep. This segmented sleep was completely normal. So, if you wake in the middle of the night and lie there, staring into the shadows and wondering about your place in the universe, you're not alone. People have always done that. Some used that gap to pray, some tended the fire. Some did other activities. And some, like you, just lay quietly, listening to the muffled world outside. The wind through the thatch, the creak of beams, the occasional bark of a far-off dog who sounds absolutely fed up. A fun fringe tidbit? In parts of Northern Europe, peasants believed in something called a night hag, a spirit that would sit on your chest while you slept, causing bad dreams and sleep paralysis. The only remedy? Sleeping in groups. Safety in numbers. Even if those numbers include your brother's smelly feet and a possibly rabid hen. You pull your cloak tighter. The chicken shifts indignantly. Your neighbor once claimed that sleeping with a red onion under your pillow would keep away both the night hag and frostbite. It didn't work. He just smelled terrible for 3 weeks and now sleeps outside by choice. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually enjoyed communal sleeping or simply endured it. Some records suggest warmth and bonding. Others hint at endless squabbles, lice infestations, and midnight arguments over blanket hoarding. Honestly, all of the above. Eventually, you slip into a dream. Maybe you're walking through a sunny field. Maybe you're eating something warm that doesn't taste like old turnips. Maybe you own 2 tunics. Luxury. And even if you wake again, cramped, cold, half covered in feathers, you know you'll drift back under. Because in the great bitter chill of the medieval night, survival isn't about comfort. It's about togetherness. And tonight, you're not alone. You wake to the sound of clinking bowls and the unmistakable squelch of someone stepping in something they definitely shouldn't have. A sharp draft cuts across your face like winter's personal slap. Morning has returned, but it's hard to tell unless you're close enough to the tiny hole in the roof, where a dim sliver of light filters through, illuminating floating dust and breath fog like particles in a snow globe. Time for breakfast. Which sounds exciting, until you remember what breakfast is. You peel yourself off the shared bed, joints creaking like poorly oiled door hinges. The straw mattress has fused to your side, and you find a mysterious feather tucked into your tunic. The chicken's gone. That's either a good or a very bad sign. You join the others near the hearth. The coals have been reignited with kindling and a bit of dried moss. A blackened pot sits precariously on a tripod, and inside is something. Technically edible, mostly liquid. Smells like onions and defeat. You each get a scoop. It's warm, which is its best quality. Otherwise, the taste is vague, the texture is questionable, and the bits floating in it might be parsnip or possibly an old root that's pretending. You don't ask. You just chew slowly and try not to think about how this counts as a meal. There's no fork. There are spoons, shared ones, carved from wood and passed down like family heirlooms. You wipe yours on your sleeve and dig in, ignoring the fact that it was last used by a toddler with questionable hygiene and no sense of personal space. Bread is offered. Not fluffy, soft bread. No, this is rye bread. Dark, dense, hard enough to be used as a weapon in a tavern brawl. You break off a chunk, merely sprain your wrist, and dip it into the stew. That helps. And next to your bowl, a cup of ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Because here's the thing, in the medieval world, water isn't always safe. Wells are often shallow, streams run near places you don't want to think about, boiling water every time you're thirsty, not happening. So people drank small ale, a weak, lightly fermented brew that wouldn't get you drunk, but wouldn't give you dysentery either, probably. You sip. It's sour, flat, a little warm. But again, it won't kill you, at least not immediately. And yes, even children drank ale. You glance over and see a 5-year-old gleefully tipping back a tiny mug like a grizzled sailor. Respect. Food isn't just fuel, it's community. As you chew your stew mush bread combo, conversation starts. Nothing serious, mostly complaints. Someone's sheep got into the herb garden. Someone else saw a fox near the chickens. There's a mild argument over whether the baker's wife is using too much soot in her crust. The topic shifts to last winter, when the snow came early and the ale froze solid. You chuckle, remembering how people had to break off chunks and melt it just to hydrate. Ale popsicles, someone says. Everyone groans. You sigh and glance toward the door. It's still cold. Still gray. But it's time to work. Winter doesn't stop the chores. The animals need feeding. The paths need clearing. And if the stew was thin this morning, it'll be thinner tonight, unless someone finds a way to stretch the rations. Still, you linger, eating slowly. Not because you're enjoying the meal, though in a strange way you are, but because this is one of the few truly warm moments of the day. Let's drop in a mainstream fact. Most medieval peasant meals, especially in winter, were plant-based, not because they were trendy vegans, but because meat was expensive. Grains, legumes, cabbage, onions, and root vegetables were the core of their diet. Spices? Rare. Salt? Hoarded like treasure. Butter? A luxury. And milk? Only if your cow wasn't frozen or sick. But here's your quirky tidbit.
Some people tried to revive stale bread by soaking it in ale and frying it near the fire, kind of like a very sad French toast. If it didn't work, they just gnawed it like a hard biscuit and pretended it built character. And historians still argue whether peasants really suffered constant hunger through the winter or if our view is a bit overdramatic.
Some evidence suggests that while winter diets were monotonous, they were sufficient, especially when communities pooled resources and planned well. Others say that any bad harvest could plunge an entire village into desperation. Either way, you eat what's available. And what's available is getting scarce. You hear the word lentils whispered like a sacred promise. Someone found a handful left in storage. That might mean a decent supper if rats haven't claimed them first. Speaking of rats, there's one skittering across the rafters now. You all pretend not to notice. If it doesn't fall into the stew, it's not a problem. That's the rule. Your spoon hits the bottom of the bowl with a hollow clink. Meal's done. You lick the edge, not because you're desperate, well, but because waste is unthinkable. One of the elders clears his throat. He begins a short blessing, thanking the saints for the warmth, the food, the safety. His voice cracks midway through, but no one interrupts. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that humbles you. The kind that reminds you, yeah, you're cold, you're tired, you're underfed, but you're alive. And there's something powerful about that. So you gather your empty bowl, place it on the shelf, really just a crooked board nailed to the wall, and tighten your belt. Not to keep your pants up, but to trick your body into thinking it's fuller than it is. Everyone does it. Breakfast is over. Your body's warm for now, and as you step toward the door, ale in your belly and breadcrumbs in your beard, you brace yourself for another day of cold wind, numb fingers, and hopeful foraging. But you'll make it.
Because this bowl of warmth, this mushy, smoky, questionable bowl, is just enough to carry you through. You push open the wooden door with a grunt, and it gives way with its usual uncooperative creak, part door, part medieval moan of existential despair. The blast of winter air punches you in the face like a tax collector with a grudge. Welcome to outside. It's snowing again. Or maybe it never stopped. The ground is hard, uneven, crusted with old boot prints and frozen puddles that look like cracked glass. You take a step. Your foot slips slightly, and you remember the thatch. You glance up. Your roof, your so-called roof, is a glorified bird nest. Bundles of straw layered thick, but never thick enough, and tied down with thin rope, sometimes weighted with stones to keep the wind from yanking it off like a cheap wig. It looks solid. From a distance. From inside, you know the truth. Thatched roofs were cheap. Easy to build. Provided insulation in theory. In practice, they were home to every critter, spider, beetle, bat, and bird, who could shove their way in. You hear the scrabble of claws, and hope it's just a squirrel this time. Anything larger, and you're looking at a roofing emergency you can't afford. But the worst part isn't what lives in your roof. It's the drafts. Invisible fingers of wind that snake their way between the rafters, caressing your neck at 3 a.m. like some particularly frisky ghost. You've stuffed every gap with moss, scraps of cloth, and sheer desperation, but nothing stops the cold completely. Still, thatching has its quirks. Fun fact, a well-made thatch roof could actually last decades if you had the resources to replace the top layer every 5 to 7 years. You do not. You stare at the brown, soggy edges, curling down like a bad haircut, and add roof repair to the imaginary to-do list you'll never finish. A child yells in the distance, then cries, then laughs. You're not sure if they fell into a snowdrift or discovered an icicle sword. Possibly both. You trudge around the house to check for damage. The northern wall is damp. Again. You poke it. It jiggles. Not great. Mud walls, wattle and daub to be fancy, are durable in dry weather, but they hate winter. Water seeps in, freezes, thaws, expands, cracks. You can't help but imagine the wall giving up and sliding off one day like a melted cake. You peer up at the chimney hole. It's just that, a hole in the thatch, where smoke sort of drifts out when it feels like it. On windy days, the smoke comes back in like it forgot its wallet. Some people call it a smoke hole. You call it a betrayal.
There's no glass on your windows. That would be luxury. Instead, you've got oiled parchment stretched over wooden frames. It lets in a murky gray glow and blocks exactly 0% of the cold. The corners are crusted with ice. You touch one and immediately regret it.
Someone coughs again. You sigh. The house is alive, in the worst possible way. You find a stick and prod at the thatch, gently knocking snow from the edges. It slides off in wet clumps, narrowly missing your foot. You've heard stories of roofs collapsing from too much snow. Some people prop up their ceilings with extra beams, just in case. You don't have extra beams. You have hope. It's a little funny, though, how much time you spend inside this house, but how much of your safety depends on outside factors. Wind, snow, thaw, animals, time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Thatched roofs were standard across much of medieval Europe, not just for peasants, but for many townsfolk too. Easy to construct, surprisingly good at shedding rain, and excellent at hiding squirrels. And the quirky bit? Some people believed that evil spirits could enter through holes in the roof, especially during winter solstice, when the veil between worlds was thin. That's why many folk customs included hanging charms or evergreen branches near the beams, warding off ghosts and mice in one go. Efficient. But historians still argue whether the thatched roof stereotype is overblown. Some suggest that more peasants than we think had access to tiles or wooden shingles, especially in regions near forests or rivers. Others say that was a rich people thing, and most folks just live with their straw hats of sadness. You take a step back and admire your work. The snow's off the roof, the cracks haven't widened, the smoke hole is, well, smoking, barely. You think you deserve a reward, maybe a crust of bread, or an extra turn sitting near the hearth tonight, assuming the dog doesn't beat you to it. The wind picks up again, rattling the side of the house. You wrap your arms around yourself and pull your hood tighter. You think about all the people who didn't make it through last winter, the ones whose homes caved in, who got sick and never recovered, who chose between food and fuel and lost both. But here you are. Your house is flawed, cracked, full of holes and ghosts and bats with questionable manners. But it's your house. It's upright, it's shelter, and tonight it might just hold. And honestly, that's enough. You stamp the snow off your boots and duck into the one place colder than your own house, the village church. It's Sunday morning, or close enough. The bells toll slowly, with a kind of exhausted wheeze that says even they aren't fully awake. You trudge forward, stiff from the cold, legs wrapped in layers of scratchy wool, and breath fogging in front of you like incense without the nice smell. The door creaks open and a wave of, not warmth, definitely not that, but stillness washes over you. Inside, the stone walls loom high and gray, like a cave that learned Latin. There's no fire, no hearth, just cold, dry air that settles in your bones like it's renting a room. Stone benches line the walls, but mostly everyone stands.
Sittings for the rich, or for the very sick. And even then, the benches are barely better than logs. You pull your hood lower and shuffle into place with the others, shoulder to shoulder, trying not to breathe too hard. It's not reverence, it's survival. The priest starts chanting in Latin. You don't understand most of it. Not many do. But the rhythm of it, the rise and fall, the echo in the vaulted ceiling, it's oddly soothing. You let it roll over you like a wave of ancient sound, your eyes scanning the painted walls. The murals are worn, saints with faded halos, demons with weirdly cheerful grins, a dragon that looks more like a confused cow. But you get the gist. Be good, don't sin, don't die. At least, not badly. The windows are stained glass, small, dark, and more decorative than helpful. They throw no light, just weird shapes onto the cold flagstone floor. Still, they're beautiful. You stare at one that shows Saint Sebastian full of arrows. He's oddly peaceful, considering the impalement. You wonder if that's a spiritual thing or just bad artistic anatomy. Then comes the incense. Someone swings a thurible, a little metal cage of burning herbs, back and forth. The smoke curls through the air, mingling with breath and dust in winter. It smells of cloves, old wood, and faint desperation. The woman next to you sneezes into her shawl. You catch sight of the altar boys. They're trying not to fall asleep. One is chewing something, another is clearly hiding a yawn behind a candle. You're impressed. If he drops that thing, you're all going to hear about it. The priest lifts his hands. More chanting. You bow your head. Not out of deep spiritual enlightenment, but because you're trying to keep the blood from leaving your face. It's cold. Let's drop in a mainstream historical fact. Medieval churches were often unheated, even in the dead of winter. Stone held the cold like a grudge. Congregants would stand through services wrapped in cloaks, trying not to collapse from a combination of devotion and hypothermia. Priests sometimes had it worse. They stood motionless for hours, hands freezing around the sacred texts. But here's your quirky tidbit. In some colder regions, congregants would bring dogs to church, not just for companionship, but for warmth. Little mutts curled around feet like medieval space heaters. Some churches banned the practice. Others quietly accepted it as divine canine mercy. Historians still argue whether peasants found true spiritual comfort in these weekly rituals, or whether it was simply another social expectation. Some evidence suggests deep belief and reverence. Other records show people dozing, whispering, or throwing shade at the neighbors mid-sermon. You're somewhere in between. You like the structure, the rhythm, the brief sense that maybe there's a point to all of this. Freezing, working, scraping by. That maybe the saints are watching and quietly rooting for you. Or at least, laughing kindly. You shift your feet. Your toes are numb. The priest speaks of giving in times of scarcity, sharing what little you have. You suppress a tiny snort. You've already given. Your sleep, your warmth, your patience, your best blanket to your cousin last night because he was coughing again. Still, the message lands somewhere. Everyone's struggling, and winter doesn't care who's rich, poor, old, young. The snow falls equally. You take a deep breath. The incense stings a little. The candlelight flickers against the damp stone. Someone hiccups. The service draws to a close. The priest lifts the chalice. You watch as the village elders line up, receive communion, bow their heads. The rest of you murmur prayers, half-remembered Latin phrases, and local blessing passed down by grandmothers who knew more about saints than any book ever did. And then, just like that, it's over. You step back outside into the wind. The sky is a bleak gray, heavy with snow. But somehow, after all that cold and all that stillness, it feels a little brighter. A cluster of women linger near the door, chatting about this and that, whose pig escaped, whose bread failed to rise. One woman swears her roof is haunted. Everyone laughs nervously. You glance back at the church, tall, silent, and cold as ever. But for all its stone and shadow, it still feels like the warmest place you've been all week. Not in temperature, in memory, in tradition, in the quiet comfort of shared belief, even when belief is stretched thin. You walk back to your home, boots crunching on frost, the smell of incense still caught in your scarf, and you think, maybe next Sunday, you'll bring the dog. You're halfway through mending a torn bootstrap with a borrowed bone needle when a rider gallops into the village square. Not a knight, not quite, a messenger. You can tell by the way his cloak flaps like an angry flag, and how his horse looks deeply annoyed to be out in this weather. He doesn't shout, doesn't need to. Everyone can feel it. Something official is coming. You sigh, drop the boot, and trudge toward the growing crowd. It's cold. It's always cold. Your breath swirls as you stand shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, huddled like penguins with debt. And then the scroll is read aloud. It's a proclamation. The king, or more likely, one of his very important men who never sleep on straw, has declared new wool regulations. Again. You groan, not loudly, but just enough for the man next to you to grunt in solidarity. Here we go. Turns out, your scratchy, homemade winter outfit might not be legal anymore. The proclamation lists approved wool grades, regional dye taxes, and, because this is England in the 1300s, What kinds of cloth peasants are allowed to wear? You blink. You reread the words in your mind. No servant or plowman shall wear cloth exceeding.
These are sumptuary laws. Rules meant to control what people can wear, eat, or display based on their social rank. In theory, they're about preserving social order. In reality, they're about keeping you and your lice in your place. If outer tunic looks too nice, you might be fined, or worse, accused of pretending to be gentry. Which is hilarious, considering your tunic is held together with sheep guts and prayers. Let's pause for a mainstream fact. Medieval England and much of Europe enacted strict sumptuary laws throughout the Middle Ages. Some were weirdly specific, like how merchants couldn't wear velvet, or how women in certain towns couldn't wear fur unless their husbands made a certain income, because God forbid your scroll trim says middle class. Now back to your current situation. You look down at your tunic. It's brown, faded, smells like soup, but it's wool, and possibly over the regulated thickness. You wonder if anyone's gonna measure it. Probably not. Probably. Then you remember that winter itself is being taxed now, because the real kicker in the announcement wasn't just the clothing, it was the new wool levy. That's right. Every villager must contribute a certain weight of wool per month to the manor, for national defense, which definitely won't be used to line the cloaks of lords while you freeze your rump off. No, sir. You glance at your sheep, grazing lazily under a dusting of snow. You mentally calculate how much wool has left. Not enough. Never enough. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some peasants began spinning dog hair into yarn to stretch their quotas. It didn't work well. The smell alone made it deeply unpopular. But desperate times call for desperate spinning wheels. The crowd begins to disperse, muttering. The bailiff walks off smugly, scroll in hand, possibly already imagining who he'll find first. You resist the urge to throw a snowball at his head. Barely. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced or just scare tactics. Some evidence suggests people regularly ignored them, while others show poor souls fined over shoelaces deemed too fancy. The line between fashion crime and frozen peasant was alarmingly thin. You head back to your house, mentally cataloging every piece of clothing you own. 1 tunic, 1 wool cloak, 2 pairs of hose, 1 mostly whole, 1 hat, technically legal, but if you add the new cowl from your aunt, risky, might be considered sumptuous, might also be the only thing keeping your ears attached. The irony is thick. The people who need warm, thick, high-quality wool are the ones banned from wearing it. You sit down, tug your patched cloak tighter, and eye the spinning wheel in the corner. There's some leftover fleece. Maybe you can dye it with onion skins to make it look duller, less threatening, less comfortable. The fire hisses quietly beside you. Someone stirs a pot. Someone else. The air in the house is heavy with smoke, cold, and quiet resignation.
You think about how many layers you're wearing. You think about how one too many might land you in the pillory. And you think about how weird it is to be too poor to survive, but too suspiciously dressed to avoid attention. Still, winter doesn't care about royal laws. It bites everyone just the same. You throw another stick on the fire, one of the last. And you tell yourself that next year, maybe you'll grow your hair out and knit it into a scarf. If it's thick enough, maybe they'll find that too. You're ankle deep in slush, holding a broken rake and silently cursing the invention of winter. The sun is up, but barely. A gray smudge behind even grayer clouds, offering absolutely no warmth and even less encouragement. Still, the animals don't feed themselves. So here you are, boots soaked, nose dripping, breath curling into the morning air like steam from a very tired kettle. It's work time. Or as it's known in your household, the never-ending, soul-chilling, frost-bitten quest for survival. First stop, the animals.
The cow greets you with a long, accusing stare, like she's personally offended by the concept of snow. You get it. Her udders are practically icicles.
You throw her a bundle of half-dry hay, and she makes a noise that's somewhere between thank you and I'm suing. You check on the chickens next. They've crowded into one corner of the coop, fluffed up like furious feather dusters. One pecks your boot. Another lays an egg on your foot. You take it as a compliment. Then, the pig. Ah, the pig. Sir snorts a lot. The loudest, stinkiest, most heat-generating member of the household. He survived 3 winters purely on stubbornness and a diet of table scraps and misplaced boots. He grunts at you, then returns to his hay pile like a true unbothered king.
Winter work is the same as summer work, only colder, wetter, and twice as miserable. You head to the wood pile, or what's left of it, a few logs, some sticks, and a vague hope.
You gather what you can carry, hands already numbing through your wool mitts. You pass the neighbor's field. Someone's out there, chopping ice from a trough with a rusty hoe. They wave, you wave back, and both of you share that look, equal parts solidarity and what are we even doing here? It's tempting to hide indoors, to stay by the fire, to say no thanks to labor today. But the truth is, medieval peasants didn't get snow days. There were always jobs: hauling, fixing, shoveling, chopping, spinning, feeding, fetching. And if there wasn't work to do, there was work to find. Because staying idle, that's how you freeze. Or worse, that's how someone notices you aren't contributing. The bailiff loves noticing things.
Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even in winter, medieval peasants worked.
Field labor slowed, yes, but animal care, wool...
Some even dug ditches or repaired roads for extra coin or community obligation. No such thing as winter break, unless you were dead. Or noble, possibly both. You head back to your own patch of land. The garden is dead, obviously. Just brown sticks poking through snow like skeletal fingers. You poke around anyway, find a frostbitten carrot, mostly intact, score. Back indoors, someone's spinning wool. You hear the rhythmic creak of the wheel and see a pile of fleece being coaxed into thread with hands that look far too red and raw for anything delicate. You sit beside them and start fixing your rake. The handle cracked last week, and you've been ignoring it. But now, it's urgent, because the next storm might bury everything, and you'll need to dig paths just to reach the animals. Tool repair becomes therapy. You sand the splinters down with a bit of rough stone, tie the pieces together with twine, and pray it holds. You fix this thing so many times, it's basically more twine than wood. That's the nature of winter work. Patch, repatch, and patch again. Someone calls your name. It's your uncle. He's got that look. You know what's coming. Ice in the latrine pit. Again. You follow him to the back corner of the yard, where a plank hovers over a hole in the ground. And yes, it's frozen. Solid. You've got to break it up. Not glamorous, not noble, just necessary. You grab a stick and start chipping. It smells like shame and cabbage. Your uncle retches. You don't. You're used to it. Welcome to the most unsung job in the medieval village. Latrine breaker. Here's a weird little tidbit. In some areas, people used ashes from the hearth to help neutralize waste in their latrines, a natural form of medieval sanitation. Also a good way to keep the smell just below horrific. Back at the house, someone's baking. You catch the scent of bread, real bread, dense and dark, but unmistakably fresh. You rush back inside like a war hero returning from the front lines, soaked, cold, and smelling faintly of excrement. And there it is, a round loaf, split on top from the heat, steam curling up like hope itself. You tear off a corner, dip it in the last of the turnip stew, and chew with the enthusiasm of someone who just fought a toilet. But the work's not done, not even close. You still need to mend the chicken fence, check the roof for leaks, sharpen the sickle, haul water, assuming the stream isn't frozen solid again. You glance toward the bucket. It is. You sigh. Deeply. Historians still argue whether winter was a time of rest for peasants or simply a shift in workload. Some records suggest people slept more, worked less. Others point to constant domestic labor, preparation for planting, and survival tasks. The truth is probably both. Work didn't stop. It just changed its shape. And honestly, so do you. In summer, You're a farmer, a digger, a knitter of sock-like objects that are definitely not socks, but kind of do the job. You stretch your sore shoulders, feel the crust of cold on your cheeks, and let out a breath. One more job done. One less day of winter to survive. It's well past dark, and the wind is back with a vengeance. It moans like a heartbroken banshee through every crack in the house, making the walls creak and your teeth chatter in sympathy. You sit by the hearth, wrapped in your cloak, eyes heavy, trying to stay awake just a little longer, because you know what's out there. The night. The cold is worse at night. It slinks in through the tiniest openings, licking across the floorboards, finding your ankles no matter how tightly you wrap them. And somewhere in the blackness outside your shutterless window, the town watchman is pacing. Or at least, he should be. You wonder if he's doing his rounds or sleeping in the alehouse. Either way, it doesn't matter. The idea of him being out there makes you feel a little safer, just a little, like the dark might hesitate before creeping in, knowing someone's listening. But here's the awkward truth. The watchman is probably just as cold and miserable as you. His job is to walk the village perimeter through the worst part of the night, armed with a stick, a horn, and absolutely no respect from the pigs he accidentally wakes. You've heard him before. A shuffle of boots, a cough, maybe a sleepy, "All's well," yelled at nobody in particular. Some nights he forgets, or decides mostly well is good enough. In larger towns, the night watch had more structure, rotating shifts, actual lanterns, and sometimes even cloaks lined with rabbit fur. Ooh, luxury. In your village, the watchman is your neighbor's cousin who drew the short straw. He walks because if he doesn't, he freezes, and also because the last time someone didn't keep watch, someone's grain store got ransacked by dogs, a goat disappeared, and old Anselm swore he saw a ghost. Still, the town watch wasn't just about crime. It was about fire. One spark from a hearth, one tipped-over candle, and the whole village could go up in flames. Thatched roofs burn like kindling. You've seen it happen. So the watchman listens for crackles in the night, for the flicker of orange where there shouldn't be any. You pull your cloak tighter. The dog curls up beside you, his snoring louder than the wind. You're not alone, but the darkness presses at the walls like a hand. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval settlements employed some form of night watch, either volunteer-based or assigned by rotation. Their responsibilities included patrolling for thieves, checking doors, spotting fires, and reporting strange goings-on. It was rarely paid, always cold, and often thankless. And the quirky tidbit? You stumble to the hearth and sit cross-legged beside a steaming cup of something. It's got bits floating in it, possibly herbs, possibly spiders. You sip. It tastes like warm earth and bitterness with a hint of hope. The local wise woman, not exactly a doctor but close enough, comes by every few days. She brings pouches of dried nettles, sage, rose hips, and something that smells like vinegar on a bad date. She's cured coughs, calmed fevers, and once allegedly brought a chicken back from the dead. That part's debated. She gave you a salve once made of goose fat and mustard seeds, told you to rub it on your chest and shout the name of a saint. You tried it. You're not sure if it worked, but your chest was warm for hours and your dog respected you slightly more afterward. You blow your nose into a scrap of linen that's seen better days. The snot freezes the moment it hits the cloth. Great. You lean back, trying not to cough in anyone's direction, and look toward the shelves of stored herbs, dried in little bundles tied with frayed string. They hang like upside-down bouquets of survival. Chamomile, yarrow, mint, elderberry. The good stuff. The old stuff. The stuff you rely on when the apothecary is 2 villages away and your cart has a wheel made of not trustable wood. Here's a proper historical fact. Medieval medicine, especially for common folk, was rooted in humoral theory, the idea that your body needed to balance 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much phlegm, cold. Too much blood, fever. The cure? Adjust your food, your activity, and occasionally your blood level. Yup, leech time. But don't worry, you're too poor for leeches. What you do get is hot onion poultices, wool scarves soaked in vinegar, and the occasional bizarre suggestion like, boil a frog and inhale the steam. Thanks, Grandma. You lay back down, you pull the blanket up to your chin, and watch your breath puff out like smoke signals. Someone's boiling something again. Probably more herbal tea, possibly a rat. Hard to say. A soft knock at the door. The wise woman herself steps in, wrapped in furs and carrying a bundle that looks alive. She eyes the room, sees your face. walks over and mutters something like, "Saint Wulfstan preserve you," before pressing a handful of dried leaves into your hand. "Steep this. Don't chew it," she says, giving you a meaningful glance. "Last time, someone got dizzy and tried to wrestle a sheep." You nod solemnly. You remember that incident. The sheep won. Outside, the wind howls again. Inside, you sneeze. Violently. A pause. Then someone else sneezes. Then the baby. Then the dog. You sigh. It's going around. But the funny thing is, everyone expects this. Winter is the time for illness. Not plague-level illness, hopefully. Just the steady background drumbeat of coughing, sore throats, and a general feeling that your bones might betray you at any moment. Your mother says, "It's the bad air." She waves her hand vaguely at the ceiling. The soot nods in agreement. Some people hang posies from the rafters, dried flowers to purify the air. Others burn herbs or sprinkle vinegar on the floorboards. You've even heard of people stuffing cloves into oranges, then hanging them on strings like festive stink bombs. But historians still argue about the effectiveness of these household cures. Were they rooted in herbal knowledge passed through generations, or just hopeful guesses that happened to sometimes work? The truth is, a little of both. You sip another herbal concoction, this one with honey and a questionable root. It's warm, and for the first time today, you don't feel like your throat's lined with gravel, so you lie back, sniffling, and watch the flickering light from the hearth. You think of all the other villagers doing the same, wrapped in their cloaks, steaming mugs in hand, praying the winter cough doesn't turn into something worse. And you think about how impressive it is, how everyone just deals with it. Not because they're tougher than you, but because there's no other option. You cough. You sip. You rest. And you do it again tomorrow. Until the snow melts. Until the sun returns. Until you can breathe again without your nose sounding like a broken bellows. Until then, there's garlic up your nose, and you're honestly fine with it. The snow has stopped, at least for now, but the cold hangs in the air like an old grudge. You're feeling slightly better, less like a plague victim, more like a soggy turnip. And so tonight, you find yourself at the neighbor's house, huddled around a fire with a few others, sharing the only thing peasants have in surplus this time of year: stories. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and you hear the distant whoo of something that could be an owl or a ghost, or the reeve on night patrol after one too many mugs of ale. Inside, it's warmer. Not cozy exactly, but human. Someone's carving a bit of wood into a spoon. Someone else is picking nits out of their cousin's hair with the calm focus of a monk copying scripture. And in the corner, old Matilda leans forward with that gleam in her eye. "It's the 12th night," she says in a gravelly whisper, "when the veil is thinnest, when things walk." You shuffle a bit closer to the fire. Winter, you see, isn't just about freezing your toes off. It's also the season of folklore, the long, dark nights when people gather close and let their imaginations run wild through the frozen woods. Because when your roof leaks, your nose drips, and your soup is just hot water with suspense, you need something to distract you from reality. You listen as the tales begin. There's the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of hunters racing across the sky, their hounds howling, their eyes glowing like coals. If you hear them, you hide. If you see them, it's already too late. There's the Yule cat in the north, who prowls the countryside and eats anyone who doesn't receive new clothes for the holiday. You look down at your patched tunic and nervously tug at a thread. And of course there's Jack Frost, the mischievous spirit, who paints windows, pinches cheeks, and sometimes slips into houses to steal warmth from the hearth, if no one leaves out a bit of bread. You glance at the fire. Consider leaving out a crust, just in case. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Winter nights in medieval Europe were rich with oral storytelling traditions. Without books, clocks, or much formal entertainment, people passed the time with songs, riddles, superstitions, and cautionary tales. Some with roots in pagan belief, others wrapped in Christian symbolism, all meant to explain the unexplainable. But here's a fringy gem. In some villages, people believed that if you swept your hearth clean after sunset, you were inviting death into your home. The soot belonged to the spirits at night. Best to leave it be. Old Matilda isn't done. She leans in closer, voice dropping. They say the spirits ride on winds like these, looking for doors that aren't barred, windows left open, firewood borrowed without thanks. They remember. The kids huddle tighter. Even the dog whimpers slightly. Someone throws another log on the fire, louder than necessary. You add your own story, of course. Everyone does. You tell of the church bell that rang on its own one snowy morning, and how the priest swore he saw footprints circling the altar, bare feet and too many toes. Everyone makes the proper noises. Ooh, no! Saint Bridget, help us! Then comes the laughter. Because fear and humor are close neighbors. You joke about the spirits being offended by your cooking. You claim Jack Frost only visits because your aunt owes him money. Someone suggests the wild hunt is just 3 angry sheep with a torch. You all laugh too loud. The fire crackles. A small girl, eyes wide, whispers, "What if the stories are true?" They are. And they aren't. Because whether it's frost spirits or just a bitter wind sneaking through your thatch, fear has a name in winter. And so does hope. Giving it a story, a shape, a motive, makes it bearable. Historians still argue whether these tales were primarily used for entertainment or education. Were they meant to scare children into behaving, or to explain the terrifying randomness of life before science filled in the gaps? Probably both. And that's the beauty of them. As the stories slow, the mood shifts. Someone starts humming, a lullaby, soft, round notes that seem to rise with the heat from the fire. Another voice joins in, and then another. It's not beautiful, but it's real and comforting. The candle sputters low. You yawn, stretching out your legs as the fire dies to embers. Someone drapes a blanket across a sleeping child. Someone else gently snores with the rhythm of a distant drum. Outside, the wind hasn't stopped. You're woken not by the light, because there is none, and not by a rooster, because he's still asleep on the rafters like a feathery little freeloader, but by a peculiar snorting sound. You open your eyes and realize there's something warm pressing against your legs. You lift the blanket. Ah, right. There's a goat in your bed. Not a metaphor, not a weird dream. A literal, horned, slightly damp goat nestled into your straw mattress. Like it owns the place. You blink, groan, and shift to the side. The goat shifts too. You are now cuddling, against your will. But honestly, you're not even mad. Because for the first time in weeks, you're actually warm. Welcome to the ancient art of barnyard central heating, also known as just put the animals inside. In summer, they live outside. In autumn, they sleep in pens. But in winter, when the temperature drops low enough to make your tears freeze mid-sob, that's when pigs, chickens, goats, and sometimes even cows move indoors. Yes, indoors. With you. You look around the room. It's chaos, but warm chaos. The pig sleeping near the hearth, snoring gently like a bellows full of ham. The chickens are perched along the window beam, silently judging everyone. And the sheep is chewing something she absolutely should not be chewing. You stretch and let out a satisfied sigh. Your body doesn't feel like an ice sculpture anymore. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In most medieval peasant homes, especially in colder climates, it was normal and often necessary for livestock to share the living space with humans during winter. Not just for convenience, but for body heat. A pig can generate a surprising amount of warmth, and you're desperate enough to accept that gift. Of course, it comes with trade-offs. The smell is potent. You have to step carefully if you value your socks. And don't even think about sleeping through the rooster's early wake-up calls, or the goat's spontaneous decisions to headbutt things. But the warmth?
totally worth it. You pull on your boots, carefully, checking for mice first, and step around the sheep to reach the bucket. It's full of water from yesterday, and a thin layer of ice coats the top. You crack it with a spoon and sip. Cold, refreshing, slightly barn-flavored. In the corner, your younger brother is tossing grain toward the chickens with the grace of someone still half asleep. One hen squawks in indignation, flaps wildly, and lands directly on the pig's head. The pig doesn't react. This is just Tuesday for him. Someone's stirring porridge on the fire. Someone else is trying to separate the goat from the bread. The baby is chewing on a tuft of wool. This is your home, your barn. Why freeze in your bed when the dog, 2 hens, and a very judgmental duck are perfectly willing to provide leg insulation? Here's a quirky fact. Some medieval households built byres, half stables, half homes, where the animals lived on one side and the family on the other, separated by a low wall or no wall at all. In some cases, the warmth from the animals was deliberately funneled into the human living space, using crude venting systems or just open doors. Your goat? He's basically a hairy radiator. And historians still argue whether this arrangement was purely out of necessity or also served as a kind of companionship. Some records suggest people preferred sleeping near animals for the sense of security and warmth they brought. Others point out the obvious health issues, smells, and potential bed-sharing accidents. Either way, you've got an entire petting zoo in your house, and somehow that feels like a win. You open the door briefly and are hit with a gust of wind. So cold it feels like it's trying to physically slap you back inside. You close it again. Nope. You turn around, shovel some hay into a basket, and drop it for the animals. The goat headbutts you affectionately, or aggressively. It's hard to tell. In the hearth, the fire's doing its best. You feed it some kindling, whispering encouragement like it's a sleepy toddler. The warmth seeps outward, mixing with the heat of the animals. And for once, you feel almost comfortable. The pig rolls over. The chickens cluck. Someone starts humming. This is winter survival, peasant edition. Not pretty, not poetic, just practical. And somehow, despite the smell and the snoring and the very real possibility of stepping in something unspeakable, it works. You pat the goat on the head and return to your straw bed. Warm, safe, alive. The wind is howling again. Not the dramatic, poetic kind of howling. This is the hungry kind. The kind that claws at the shutters, slips under the door, and makes the candles shiver. You're back inside, seated cross-legged by the fire, gnawing on the last crust last week's bread. You dip it in a bowl of something vaguely turnip adjacent, and chew thoughtfully. You're not just cold now, you're hungry. That quiet, gnawing kind of hungry. The kind that doesn't scream, just lingers in the belly like a ghost. Because welcome, friend, to the hunger season. Also known as, you thought autumn was bad? You shift on your stool and glance at the pantry, if you can call it that. It's really just a few shelves and a wooden chest. Inside, a few shriveled onions, a sack with maybe 2 cups of barley left, a half-wheel of cheese that's gone so moldy it looks like it wants to be buried in its own tiny grave. You scrape the last of your stew, but you're doing math in your head that you wish you weren't good at. How many days can you stretch a bowl of lentils? How many people can one salted herring feed? And will anyone actually eat the eyes this time? Here's your mainstream historical fact. From January to March, medieval peasants endured what was grimly known as the famine months. Preserved food ran low, nothing new could be planted, and snow made foraging impossible. Bread got thinner, soups got sadder, and belts got tighter, literally and metaphorically. A child walks past, holding half a boiled turnip like it's a treasure. Someone chuckles. You don't. You remember last winter when the turnips ran out completely. That's when things got desperate. That's when old Marjorie tried to boil her leather shoe. Spoiler,
She didn't finish it. You reach into your pocket and pull out a small dried apple slice. You stare at it for a moment. You were saving it for spring, but it's cold. You're tired, and your stomach makes a noise like an angry fox. You eat it. It tastes like sun-warmed memories. Someone calls from the doorway. Your neighbors come to trade. He's got a sack of dried beans. You've got eggs. A few. Not many. You hesitate. Then make the deal. Hunger has a way of making you incredibly generous with things that aren't yours, like your chicken's future offspring. You hand over the eggs and hold the beans like they're gold.
Here's a fringy tidbit. In certain parts of medieval Europe, people believed mice brought food luck in winter, so killing one was seen as a kind of curse, which is adorable until they chew through your last bag of grain. Then it's war. You glance at the ceiling. You hear them. The mice. Tiny party animals of hunger season. You toss a boot at the rafter and mutter a prayer.
Dinner tonight? Barley soup. Again. But this time, you've got a tiny bit of dried beef to add. Just a shaving. Just enough to smell like hope. Everyone gathers around the fire with their bowls. No one complains. No one expects anything more. You sip slowly, letting the warmth fill you from the inside out. It's thin, but it's hot, and it's yours. Historians still argue whether peasant diets were dangerously inadequate or surprisingly efficient. Some records show seasonal malnutrition and infant death spikes. Others suggest that with tight planning and communal effort, many villages weathered winter without true famine. But one thing's agreed on. Spring never came fast enough. You lean back against the wall, bowl empty, stomach quiet for now. The fire crackles. Someone tells a joke about a friar, a cow, and a cursed loaf. It doesn't make sense. You laugh anyway. The stars are out. You can't see them, but you know they're there, burning, distant, indifferent. And still, you hold on. Because winter always ends. The ground will thaw, the roots will wake, the hunger will fade, and you'll still be here.
The thaw begins, as it always does, not with trumpets or sunbursts, but with drips. Tiny rhythmic taps on the roof, a wetness in the air, a sag in the snowbanks that hints just barely at surrender. You wake up one morning, still wrapped in your cloak, and realize something strange. Your breath isn't fogging quite as much. You sit up slowly. There's a puddle forming in the corner, near the broken beam. You frown. Then you smile, because puddles mean change. Puddles mean the ice is pulling back. The cold is loosening its grip, not gone, not yet, but cracking like old bone. You step outside into a world still blanketed in snow, but it's softer now. The edges are melting, the paths are slush, and the wind has lost its bite. You blink at the pale gray sky, and there, a hint of blue. Faint, shy, almost imaginary. You walk through the village slowly. People are stirring differently now, not just because they must, but because they want to. There's a lightness in the way they haul water, patch fences, sweep porches. It's not celebration, not yet, but it's hope. Someone's singing, not loudly, a hum, maybe just a tune from a dream. You follow it past the blacksmith's shed, where a rooster is strutting like he personally invented spring. Inside your house, the animals have started migrating back outside, voluntarily. Even the goat seems done with your hospitality. The pig, for his part, still refuses to move. He's decided this is his room now. Your mother started sweeping with actual energy. Your sister's washing everything. Blankets, clothes, children floors. You help hang damp tunics near the fire. It smells like soap and wet wool and survival. That ancient cheese wheel? You scrape off a heroic layer of mold and find something beneath it that still technically qualifies as food. You all eat it with crusts of bread and a little boiled cabbage. It's the best thing you've had in weeks. And you laugh. Full-bellied, watery-eyed laughter. Because you made it. You didn't think you would. Not really. Not during the coughing. Not during the starvation math. Not during the frostbitten latrine shift. But you did. Later that night, the village gathers. Outside. Yes, outside. You bring what you can. Bits of dried apple, leftover turnips, 3 songs everyone half remembers. A pipe player whose instrument sounds like a sick goose. A girl who can juggle 2 eggs and a rock. It becomes, without planning, a festival. A soft one. A cautious one. No one's pretending the world is fixed, but everyone's celebrating that it's not as broken as it was. Children chase each other through the slush. Elders sit on logs, bundled in wool, eyes squinting toward the distant edge of the fields. Someone lights a small fire in the center. You all lean in, as if warmth is a secret you're passing around like a story. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. Medieval villages often held spring celebrations, feasts of renewal, of planting, of survival. May Day was one, but local customs varied wildly. Some sang, some danced, some just sat together, letting the thaw seep into their bones. And a quirky tidbit to end with. In some places, villagers would beat the bounds of their parish, marching the border, smacking landmarks with sticks, while singing to drive away evil spirits and welcome the growing season. Medieval GPS meets therapy walk. Historians still argue whether spring brought relief or just different work. The planting season came with its own brutal pace, but few deny the emotional shift. People moved with lighter steps, laughed more often, and believed, however briefly, that maybe, just maybe, this year would be easier. You lie back in the slush-wet grass, eyes on the first true stars you've seen in months. No clouds, no breath fog, just sky. Someone hands you a mug. It's warm, maybe ale, maybe broth, maybe miracle. And for the first time in what feels like forever, you stop counting the days. Because you've already lived them, and now you get to live more. And now, with the cold behind you and the spring before you, let yourself rest. The fire's burned low, the animals have gone quiet. The air, once filled with howling wind and shivering limbs, is still now, soft with evening warmth and distant song. You lie back onto straw that doesn't itch quite as much as it used to. Or maybe you've just grown used to it. The woolen blanket rises and falls with your breath. You can hear it now, how steady it is, how strong, how alive. The village is quiet, not silent, just calm. A baby sighs, a door creaks, the faint jingle of a goat's bell, far off, drifting on a breeze that no longer bites. It brushes your cheek like a whisper, not a warning. You've weathered the worst of it, the long nights, the coughs, the thin broth and thinner blankets. You've shared heat, hope, and maybe a little garlic up the nose. You've laughed when it wasn't funny, slept when it wasn't comfortable, survived when it wasn't certain, and now you get to sleep. So let your muscles go heavy, let your mind wander to thawing fields and quiet mornings. Let the crackling echo of the hearth lull you into warmth, into peace, into stillness. The stars are out, the worst has passed, and you beautiful, stubborn, mud-covered miracle, you made it. Good night, sleep deep, spring is waiting.